I never believed in haunted houses. I never believed in anything I couldn't see. If you'd told me 5 years ago that I'd one day write down what happened to me, I would have laughed it off as some internet creepypasta nonsense. But something happened in that house. Something I can't forget. Even if I tried. It started in late 2019. I had just moved into a small, two-story home on the edge of Dayton, Ohio. The house was old but sturdy, brick foundation, wooden floors that creaked with every step, and a basement that the realtor described as unfinished but dry. I'd just broken up with my long-term girlfriend, and I needed a place to reset. I worked remotely doing tech support, so it didn't matter where I lived. This house was cheap, quiet, and surrounded by woods. Perfect, I thought. When I first moved in, the basement felt colder than it should have. Not just temperature-wise, it had a kind of weight to it. The kind that makes you hold your breath for no reason. The walls were lined with faded insulation. The floor was a patchwork of concrete and dirt, and there was this old, rusted metal door at the far end that the realtor said led to an old storage pit. I didn't bother checking it the first few weeks. I had enough on my plate setting up furniture and trying to get my life back on track. It wasn't until the third week that things started feeling off. The first thing I noticed was the smell. It wasn't constant. It would come and go, like wet metal mixed with rot. I checked the drains, the laundry machine, even crawled under the sink. Nothing. Then came the sound. At night, when the house got quiet, I'd sometimes hear faint tapping, always from the basement. It sounded like someone gently knocking on metal. Not fast, not loud, and just steady. Tap, tap, tap. Then silence. I told myself it was the pipes, or maybe a raccoon got in through the vents. But one night, I decided to go down and check. It was around 12:30 a.m. I remember because I was watching a movie and paused it when I heard the noise again. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. The wooden steps creaked under my feet as I went down. The air got colder with each step. When I reached the bottom, the smell hit me again. Strong this time, sour and metallic. The basement was still. Nothing moved. I swept my light across the walls, over the water heater, the shelves, the furnace. Nothing. Then I heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. It came from the far side, the rusted metal door. I stood there for a while, listening. The tapping stopped. I waited a few seconds, then took a cautious step forward. The door was covered in old, flaking paint. There was no knob, just a handle you had to lift. It looked like it hadn't been opened in decades. When I reached out to touch it, I noticed something strange. The metal was warm. That didn't make sense. It was freezing down there. I pulled my hand back. My heart was pounding now, and I decided I'd had enough exploring for one night. I went back upstairs, locked the basement door, and told myself I'd call someone to check it in the morning. But I didn't. I never did. A few days later, I was on a work call when I heard it again, faint tapping. Only this time it sounded like it was coming from the vents. I muted my mic and listened. The tapping moved. It traveled through the ducts, soft but deliberate, like something crawling through the metal. That night, I barely slept. I kept hearing noises, a low humming sound, sometimes whispery, sometimes mechanical, always from below. The next morning, I decided to investigate properly. I brought a flashlight, a small crowbar, and my phone camera just in case. The basement felt colder than ever. The air was so heavy it almost felt wet. When I reached the metal door, I noticed something new. On the concrete just below it, there were small marks. Scratches about an inch long each in pairs, like something had been dragged. I lifted the handle and gave it a tug. The metal groaned, but it didn't budge. I put more force into it, and with a loud screech it gave way. Behind the door was a short, narrow tunnel. The walls were brick and the ground was dirt. I could see that it went maybe 10 feet in before turning left, and that smell, stronger than ever now. I turned on my phone's camera flashlight and crouched in. My shoulders brushed the walls as I moved forward. The air was damp and thick, and every sound I made seemed too loud. At the end of the tunnel, it opened into a small chamber, maybe 8 feet. The ceiling was low enough that I had to hunch. There was nothing inside. Just dirt walls and a single object sitting in the corner, an old wooden chair. I walked closer, shining the light over it. The seat was rotted, and the legs looked like they'd sunk slightly into the ground. And then, I noticed something carved into the wall above it. Words. Crude, shallow letters scratched into the brick. He never left. I stared at it for a long time. My first thought was that maybe it was part of the house's history. Maybe someone used it as a shelter decades ago. But something about the way those letters looked made my stomach twist. They weren't old enough. The cuts were still sharp, clean. I started recording on my phone. I spoke softly, narrating what I was seeing. My voice sounded shaky. Just as I turned back toward the tunnel, my flashlight flickered. Once, twice, then went out completely. I cursed, tapping my phone, trying to get it back on. In the dark, I heard something, a slow creak. Wood bending. The sound came from behind me. I turned, heart hammering, and saw the chair, moving. It shifted just slightly, one leg dragging across the dirt. I bolted. Crawled through the tunnel so fast I scraped my shoulder against the brick. When I finally reached the basement and slammed the metal door shut, I dropped the crowbar and just stood there, shaking. I told myself it was just fear, just my imagination and bad lighting. But deep down, I knew what I saw. For the next few days, I avoided the basement completely. But things upstairs started to change too. Small objects went missing. My keys, a mug, the remote. I'd hear footsteps at night, but only when I was in bed. Soft, dragging steps on the floorboards, always heading toward the basement door. On the fifth night after that, I woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of my phone vibrating. It was lying on my bedside table, screen lit. I picked it up. There was a new video saved in my camera roll, the one I'd taken in the basement days ago. But the timestamp showed it had been modified at 2:37 a.m. that night. I opened it. The footage played normally at first. My shaky hand, my nervous voice, the chair, the writing on the wall. Then, right as the light flickered, the part where it had gone dark before, something new appeared. A face. For a single second. Before the screen went black, the light from my phone caught something behind the chair. A shape, a pale face. Eyes wide, mouth open, like it was watching me leave. The video ended. My throat went dry. I played it again, pausing at the exact moment. There was no doubt. Someone, or something, had been down there with me. That night, I left all the lights on. I couldn't sleep. I sat on the couch with my laptop, trying to convince myself there was a logical explanation. Maybe the camera glitched. Maybe it was dust or shadows. Around 4 a.m., I started to feel this vibration, a low hum coming through the floor. I put my hand down and realized it was coming from beneath me. The basement. I went to the door and pressed my ear against it. At first, I didn't hear anything. Then, faintly in a voice, a man's voice, muffled but calm. He was saying something over and over. I could barely make out the words, but it sounded like, "Come back." The voice was soft, almost conversational, like someone trying to get my attention from another room. But I lived alone. I stayed frozen with my ear to the door, not sure if I should scream or run. Then it stopped. Dead silence. For a long moment, I just stood there, staring at the wood grain of the door. Then I heard it again, only this time from the vents behind me. "Come back." It was clearer now. Male voice, low, deliberate. I stepped back, staring at the ceiling vent as if I'd see something behind it. My rational brain was trying to explain it. Maybe a neighbor's TV, maybe the wind. But deep down, I knew better. The words weren't distorted. They were too clear. I didn't go back to sleep that night. I sat there until sunrise, staring at that basement door. The next morning, I decided I was done pretending this was normal. I called the realtor who had sold me the house. She sounded surprised to hear from me. When I mentioned noises and the weird chamber behind the metal door, she went quiet. After a long pause, she said, "Mr. Bennett, that door shouldn't be there." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "The basement was sealed years ago," she said. "The previous owner, he had a section blocked off after an accident. You shouldn't be able to access it." I told her I'd gone inside. I described the tunnel, the chair, the carvings. She didn't respond for almost 10 seconds. Then she said quietly, "Don't go down there again." When I asked why, she hung up. That day felt longer than any I can remember. I kept hearing faint noises, clicks, thuds, whispers I couldn't quite place. Around noon, I started feeling like I wasn't alone in the house. Every sound felt deliberate, as if someone were matching their movements to mine. At one point, while making coffee, I saw a shadow move past the corner of my eye, near the hallway that led to the basement. I turned, expecting to see something, but there was nothing there. That's when I decided to set up a camera. I had an old security cam from my last apartment. Motion sensor, night vision, the works. I mounted it on the kitchen counter, angled toward the basement door. If anything happened, I'd have proof. A hand. It was pale, shriveled, and pressed against the underside of the cement, as if someone had been buried face up. Frozen in the moment they reached out for help. I stumbled backward, hitting the wall behind me. Daniel cursed under his breath, pulling out his phone. His hands were shaking. We called the police. They arrived fast. Within 10 minutes, the basement was filled with uniforms, flashlights, and yellow tape. They sealed off the area, started questioning me, taking photos. Daniel gave his statement, then left, pale and silent. Hours passed. The officers worked carefully, breaking through the rest of the patch. Eventually, they uncovered the full body, a woman, maybe in her 40s. Her clothes were old, from another decade, and her face was sunken beyond recognition. They didn't let me see much after that. One of the detectives told me it looked like she'd been there for years, maybe even decades. They'd have to do DNA testing to figure out who she was. That night, I stayed at a friend's place. There was no way I could sleep in that house again. But around 3 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was an email, from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line just said, "You shouldn't have opened it." The body of the email was blank. I deleted it immediately, assuming it was some cruel joke. But the next morning I got another message. Same sender. This time it said, it wasn't supposed to be found. I called the detective assigned to my case and told him about the emails. He told me not to worry, that it could be someone trolling after the news spread. But the story hadn't even gone public yet. No one outside the investigation was supposed to know. The next few days were a blur. I stayed with friends, tried to focus on work, anything to distract myself. But the nights were the worst. I kept having the same dream. I'd wake up in my old house, standing at the top of the basement stairs, hearing someone whisper my name from below. Sometimes I'd see a faint light flickering from the bottom. Other times, just darkness. A week later, the detective called again. They'd identified the woman. Her name was Claire Anderson. She'd lived in the house before me, 30 years ago. According to records, she'd gone missing in 1994. Her husband had reported her disappearance, claimed she'd run away after an argument. He died a few years later. When I heard that, my stomach dropped. Because when I'd moved into the house, my landlord mentioned that it used to belong to a man named Anderson. He'd said it casually, like trivia. I realized then that the landlord wasn't the original owner. He was the son. That night, I went back to the house with the detective's permission to gather the rest of my things. I just wanted to be done with it, to close that chapter. The basement was sealed off, the floor covered with new boards and police tape. I tried not to look at it as I packed, but when I went upstairs to grab my laptop from the desk, I noticed something strange. My email was open on the screen, and another message had arrived. This one was different. It didn't come from the same address. It was from my own. It said, "You shouldn't have come back." I slammed the laptop shut and ran out of the house. I drove straight to a hotel and didn't go back for days. The detective brushed it off again when I told him, said maybe it was a hacker or malware. But something in his tone told me he was just trying to keep me calm. He didn't sound convinced. Weeks passed. The investigation wrapped up quietly. They ruled Claire's death a homicide but couldn't find enough evidence to charge anyone. They suspected her husband, but since he was long dead, that was the end of it. I found a new place across town. Small, modern, no basement. For a while, things felt normal again. Then, one evening, as I was unpacking boxes, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It said, "There's still someone down there." I froze. I tried to call the number, but it went straight to voicemail. I blocked it, deleted it, told myself it was random spam. But that night, as I was lying in bed, I heard a familiar sound, a faint dragging noise. Slow, deliberate, coming from beneath the floor. My apartment doesn't even have a basement. For a moment, I lay still, heart pounding so hard it felt like my ribs would crack. Then I got up, pressed my ear against the floor, and held my breath. The sound stopped, and then, very quietly, right beneath where I stood, I heard a whisper. "You opened the wrong one." I stumbled backward, knocking over a chair. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't sleep for many nights after that. Eventually I moved again. Different city, different state. I never told anyone where. I changed my number, deleted old accounts, cut ties with anyone connected to that house. For a long time, I thought maybe it was finally over. That whatever happened there was buried with the past. Until last week. I was scrolling through an online marketplace looking for furniture for my new place when I saw a familiar listing. It was my old house. For sale again. Same address. Same photos. Except for one thing. In the background of one picture near the basement door, there was something the realtor must not have noticed. A dark, human-shaped shadow. Standing perfectly still, facing the camera. And when I looked closer, I realized it wasn't a trick of light. The outline was too clear, too defined. It looked exactly like me. I closed the laptop, heart pounding. I don't know how that's possible. I don't know what I saw that night or what I might have let out when we broke that cement floor open. But I know one thing for sure. Whatever was buried down there wasn't meant to stay hidden. And whatever it was, it's still not done with me. So if you ever move into an old house and someone tells you never to mess with the basement, listen to them. Because once you open that door, you might not just find what was left behind. You might find what's still waiting for you. That night, I left all the lights off except the one in the hallway. I wanted it to feel natural. I went to bed upstairs, door open, and let the camera do its job. Sleep came slow. I kept imagining that voice again, whispering from the vents. But exhaustion eventually won. When I woke up, the house was still. Morning light through the blinds. For a moment, everything felt normal again, until I remembered the camera. I opened the footage on my laptop. At first, nothing. Hours of still frames. Then, around 3:12 a.m., the motion alert triggered. The basement door was opening, slowly, inch by inch, until it was halfway open. The light from the hallway barely reached the bottom of the stairs, but something was visible. A figure standing just inside the shadows. It was still. Completely still. No movement, no face. Just a dark outline of a person. After about 15 seconds, the door began to close again, on its own. The figure didn't move. The last frame before it shut looked like the figure had tilted its head slightly upward, toward the camera. I paused the footage there and just stared. There was no mistaking it now. Something was down there. I didn't know what to do. Call the police? Tell them what? That a ghost opened my door? I felt insane even thinking it. But I couldn't ignore it anymore. I left the house that morning, drove to a diner a few miles away and just sat there, trying to think. I pulled up public records about the house. There wasn't much, just that it had been built in 1951 and had a few owners over the decades. But then I found an old newspaper clipping from 1993. Local man found dead in basement. Investigation ongoing. The name matched one of the past owners. The article said he was found by his wife after neighbors reported a constant hammering sound coming from the basement. Police had determined it was a heart attack brought on by physical exertion. I tried to find more, but that was it. No follow-up, no explanation of what he'd been doing down there. When I got back home that afternoon, the front door was unlocked. I knew I'd locked it that morning. The house smelled like that same wet metallic rot. Stronger than ever, I followed the smell into the kitchen and froze. The basement door was wide open. I didn't want to go near it, but something in me, maybe anger, maybe curiosity, pushed me forward. I grabbed the nearest thing I could use as a weapon, a heavy wrench, and flicked the light switch at the top of the stairs. It flickered once, then stayed on. The stairs were empty. I took a few cautious steps down. Halfway down the stairs, I saw something on one of the steps, a small rusted nail standing upright. The head glistened faintly, like it had just been used. When I reached the bottom, I noticed the metal door was open again. The tunnel gaped like a throat in the far wall. I called out, "Hello!" My voice came back as a low echo. Then faintly, another voice answered. You came back. My blood went cold. I stepped back, holding the wrench in front of me. Who's there? No answer. Just that humming sound again. Low, vibrating, like metal under tension. The walls seemed to almost pulse with it. I turned toward the stairs, but before I could take a step, the basement light flickered. Once, twice. Then everything went black. In the dark, I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming closer from inside the tunnel. I swung the wrench blindly, hitting nothing but air. The footsteps stopped. Then, from the blackness, I heard breathing. Not loud, but close. Too close. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the wrench. I fumbled for my phone to use as a flashlight, but before I could turn it on, something touched my wrist. Cold fingers. Light, almost curious. I jerked my arm back and stumbled up the stairs, slamming into the door at the top. I threw my shoulder into it until it clicked shut, then locked it. For a long time, I just sat against the door, panting, trying not to cry. I didn't leave the house immediately. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to prove to myself I wasn't losing it. Maybe part of me thought I could fix it. Over the next few days, I noticed new things. The smell was now upstairs, too. The walls sometimes made this faint crackling sound, like something shifting inside them, and every morning I'd find the basement door unlocked, no matter how many times I secured it. I called a locksmith. He replaced the lock, even added a deadbolt. That night I checked it 3 times before going to bed. At 2:11 a.m., I woke up to the sound of metal scraping against wood. I knew that sound instantly. The deadbolt was turning. I sat up, heart pounding. I didn't move and just listened. The bolt clicked open. The hinge creaked. Footsteps on the stairs. I couldn't move. I wanted to grab my phone, call someone, but I couldn't even breathe. The footsteps reached the top and stopped. Then, after a long silence, 3 knocks on my bedroom door. Not loud. Not threatening. Just 3 calm, slow knocks. I didn't answer. I didn't even look. I pulled the blanket over my face like a terrified child and stayed that way until sunlight hit the wall. When I finally got up, the house was quiet again. The basement door was closed. Everything looked exactly the same. Except for one thing. There were muddy footprints on the floor, leading from the basement door all the way to my bedroom. And in the doorway, resting against the frame, was the old wooden chair, the same one from the tunnel. I barely slept that night. Every small noise in the house felt amplified. The refrigerator hum, the creak of pipes, the occasional shuffle of tree branches scraping against the window. But underneath all of it, I swore I could still hear that faint, dragging sound coming from below. I tried to convince myself it was my imagination. After all, I'd been through enough that week to make anyone paranoid. But a part of me knew something was still down there. The next morning, I decided to call my landlord again, this time more forceful. I told him there might be something wrong with the foundation, that I'd heard scratching and movement under the basement floor. He sighed and said he'd send someone over to check the pipes and walls. I could tell he didn't believe me, but I didn't care. I just needed another person in that basement. Someone else to see, or at least feel, what I had. Around noon, a maintenance guy showed up. His name was Daniel. Tall, mid-30s, calm, but with that tired, no-nonsense look of someone who's seen it all. He carried a toolbox and a flashlight and joked about haunted basements before walking downstairs. I followed him halfway, staying close enough to hear but not wanting to go all the way down again. He moved slowly through the space, tapping at the walls, crouching to check the pipes. Every few seconds, I'd hear his boots scrape against the concrete. Then there was silence. "Everything okay?" I called out. "Yeah," he replied, but his voice sounded different. Lower, almost hesitant. "Can you come here for a sec?" My stomach twisted. I didn't want to go down there, but the tone of his voice pulled me in. I stepped carefully down the stairs, holding the railing tight. Daniel was standing near the far corner, flashlight aimed at the floor. "Look," he said quietly. The light revealed a section of the basement floor where the concrete looked uneven, like a patch had been redone years ago. But what caught my eye wasn't the floor itself. It was the faint outline of something beneath it, a slightly raised rectangular shape, maybe 6 feet long. "Looks like someone poured over something," Daniel said. "You ever noticed this before?" I shook my head. My mouth had gone dry. He knelt and tapped the spot with a wrench. It sounded hollow. Before I could stop him, he set his tools down and said, "I'll open it up a bit just to see if there's a problem underneath. Probably just an air pocket." I wanted to tell him not to leave it alone, but the words wouldn't come. I just stood there as he took out a small hammer and started chipping at the corner. The sound of metal hitting cement echoed through the basement, sharp and rhythmic. After a few minutes, a chunk broke loose. Then another. A faint smell seeped out. It wasn't rot exactly. More like damp earth mixed with something metallic. Daniel frowned and leaned closer, shining his flashlight into the small gap. That's when he froze. Jesus Christ, he whispered. I stepped closer, heart pounding. What is it? He didn't answer. He just dropped the flashlight. It rolled across the floor, spinning light wildly around the walls. When I picked it up and looked into the hole, I saw something I'll never forget.